In this section of the course, we'll be developing an entire website using the scripting languages we've explored. This is an example of what the completed project will look like. The website name is titled The Perfect Cup. The purpose of this website is to provide users with information about the company, which is a fictional coffee shop based out of Beverly Hills, California. The website also features a member access blog that provides a showcase of recipes for different types of coffee blends. The development of this website will require us to utilize many of the different development techniques we've learned throughout this course. Let's conduct a brief overview of the process from beginning to end. For the front-end layout of this website, we'll be using a Bootstrap theme. The theme can be downloaded from the link below. We've also included a copy of the theme in the Downloads folder. We'll need to make minor changes to the theme as we progress through the tutorial. As you can see, the theme is fully responsive to all devices. As I resize the browser, you'll notice that the navigation menu jumps to the top and the menu is collapsed. We can expand it by clicking this button. So you can see that the layout again is responsive. The website will consist of 4 main pages. Each page will have the web page title and address at the top, followed by a navigation menu. The content area of each page will be below the navigation menu, followed by a footer at the bottom of each page. The 4 pages include a home page, which is what we're looking at here, and the home page contains an image carousel that automatically transitions through 3 images. We also have an About page. This page will contain an embedded responsive YouTube video and images of the company staff members. So you can see that this video is responsive as I resize the browser window. The web page will also have a members-only blog that requires authentication in order to access. So I've just logged out, and if I click blog again, you'll notice that we get a message indicating that we must be logged in to view the blog. And the login requires a valid email address and password. For users that have not yet registered, they can click the Register Here button. And on the registration page, they need to complete their first name, last name, email address, and enter a password that they'd like to use to log in. The users will all be stored in a database after registration. So after this form is processed, all the data will be stored in a database. And the database will have the following structure. It'll have an ID field, which serves as an auto-incrementing primary key. It'll have an fname, lname, email, and password field, and that'll store all the data from our form. The registration form also has PHP validation with AJAX integration to display error messages without page refresh if the fields are not completed properly. So if I leave the entire form empty and click register, you'll notice that there's no page refresh, but an error message is displayed. And the same is true for each field. The first name requires more than 2 characters, and the same with the last name. The email address requires more than 4 characters and the correct email format. So if I were to put an incorrect email format, you'll notice I get the email address is required error message. In addition to the validation, the plain text password will be encrypted before being stored into the database. And this will be done using the phpbcrypt method, which is a very secure way of encrypting passwords, and we'll go through all that once we get to that stage. But just to show you what an encrypted password looks like in our database, this particular test user, the password entered was test0101, and you can see what it translates to once it's encrypted. So I'll just log into the blog to show you what the blog looks like. And again, this is just another test account. once the user is authenticated, they'll be greeted with a welcome message and an option to log out of the blog. This entire process is done using PHP session variables, and again, we'll get to that once we start our development as well. The actual blog has 3 blog posts. As you can see, each one has an image. There's also a read more button at the bottom of each blog post. So if we click read more, you can see a modal pops up and there's space for additional content relevant to that blog posting. And so that's it for the blog. It's fairly simple. Lastly, we have a contact page that includes an embedded map of the business location. So we've just put in a test address, 3481 Melrose Place, Beverly Hills. And we've embedded a Google map image of this location. And we'll show you how to do that as well. At the bottom of this page, we have a contact form. And the contact form is processed using PHP. There's also validation using a combination of PHP and AJAX. To submit the data in this form to our email address, we'll be using a PHP library known as phpmailer to send emails to a specified email address using the SMTP protocol. So once the user fills out this form and clicks submit, phpmailer will transmit this data to an email address of our choice. And so that's the entire web page, and we'll go ahead and get started in the next lesson. We can upload it to our live production server. To do so, log into your linode.com hosting account. Click on the My Linode server and click the boot button to start the server if it's not already running. Now we'll just need to give this about a minute or so. Now that the server is running, we'll need to open FileZilla. With FileZilla open, go to File, Site Manager, and click on the My Linode entry and click Connect. Enter your passphrase. Now on our server, we'll need to navigate to the HTML directory. So this is the path to the HTML directory, and click Enter. You may have a couple of files in your HTML directory. You can go ahead and delete those. Now on your local machine, you're going to have to open the Perfect Cup directory in your web root folder. So this is the path to mine. And I'm going to highlight all the files. So you can click the first one and then hold Shift and click the last file. That'll highlight all of them. And drag them over to your server and the upload will begin. And once the upload is complete, we'll go ahead and test to make sure that it's working. So in your web browser, type in your domain name. And at the end of the domain name, just type in /index.php. So as you can see, the web page is loaded. And everything appears to be working correctly. If you haven't registered a domain name, you'll have to use the IP address of your server. To get the IP address, go back to Linode, click on the Linodes tab, and you can copy the IP address corresponding to the My Linode server over here. So remember that your IP would obviously be different than mine. And you'll see it brings up the same page. When we click on blog, we have the login and registration page. Now we won't be able to register new users because we haven't imported the database onto our production server. So that's the next thing we'll need to do. So we'll need to log in to phpmyadmin on our server. So just type in phpmyadmin. and then log in as the root user and enter your password. We'll need to create the perfect cup database on our production server before we import our members table. So I'll just go ahead and click on the databases tab. Now we're going to type in perfect cup and choose UTF-8 Unicode CI as the collation. Now click on the perfect cup database on the left column. Next, open phpmyadmin on your local machine, and this will be done through the WAMP or MAMP menu, phpmyadmin. Click on the perfect cup database on the left column and click the export button. Just leave the default settings and click go. And now open the text file. Copy all the content in the text file. So right click and hit copy. Now go back to the production server phpmyadmin and click the import button. Or sorry, click the SQL button, because we're going to just paste the SQL into this text area. So right click and hit paste, and then click go. Now click on the perfect cup database again, and you'll see we have the members table with the test accounts we'd already created. So now the database has been imported. Now we'll need to update the database connection string on a few of our PHP pages. So on the pcheck.php page, just plug in the password for your production server, for your production MySQL server, and do the same for add user and send message.php. Okay, we'll need to re-upload these pages, so just go back to FileZilla. And just please make sure you have saved the changes. So once you've inserted your password for your production server, make sure you save the changes. Now in FileZilla, we're going to re-upload pcheck.php, send message.php, and add user.php. You're going to be asked if you want to overwrite the existing files. Just click OK. And now they've been overwritten. So that's an important consideration. When you're testing your web page on your local machine, you typically won't have a password to connect to your database. But of course, on your production server, security is very important, and you will need to enter the password. So because we've entered a password here, this will no longer work on our local machine. So when you're testing on your local machine, remove the password. To make this more efficient, you can also cut your connection string out of each document and put it into an external file, and then use the PHP require statement to include it in each document you want that requires a database connection. But for now, we'll just leave it as is. Okay, so now I'll just pull the website back up. And we'll click on the blog. We'll register a new user to make sure that the registration page is working and connecting with our database. Okay, so the account was processed. Let's go back to our database and make sure the record was added. So there is sarah@gmail.com, the encrypted password. And now we'll log in. So I'll go to the blog. Since we just registered, we're automatically already logged in. Remember that the session variables were activated. So I'm going to click the log out button, click on the blog again, and now it's asking me to log in. So everything is working. I'll click on the contact form and just send a test email. And we can see that the message has been sent. So this completes the project. You can go through the web page and just make sure that everything is working correctly. Once you've finished, you can close the files in your text editor. So we have quite a bit of things open here. You can go ahead and close all this down. Make sure you've saved all your files. I'm going to close down this web page. Close down the phpmyadmin on our local machine, phpmyadmin on our server. Log out of your Linode. Oh, sorry, before you log out, make sure that you turn the server off. This is assuming you finished testing the page. Because remember that your build whenever your server is running. So we just had it on for a couple of minutes. Make sure that you do wait until the system shutdown shows a success alert. Okay, now that the server has been shut down, I'm going to log out of Linode. Close down the browser. And that's it. So hopefully you enjoyed the project, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Before we get started on this project, we'll need to make sure we have a few things ready. First, make sure that you have your WAMP or MAMP server running. Otherwise, you won't be able to preview the website as we develop it. Next, open your downloads file and also open the folder pertaining to this lecture. Transfer the folder titled Perfect Cup to your www directory contained in the WAMP or MAMP folder. So you can see that the path to my web root folder is C drive, WAMP, and then www. So I'm going to take the Perfect Cup folder and I'm going to transfer it into the web root folder. This folder contains the theme which we downloaded from startbootstrap.com. We just renamed the folder to Perfect Cup, so it applies to our web development project. The folder contains 4 HTML files and 4 subfolders: CSS, fonts, image, and JS. The CSS folder contains the bootstrap.css and bootstrap.min.css files. It also contains a custom CSS file for this specific layout called Business Casual. The fonts directory contains the fonts used for this theme. The image folder contains 8 images which will be used on our website. The JS folder contains the Bootstrap JavaScript files and also the jQuery.js file. These are all essential and they'll be used throughout our development. Since some of our pages will require PHP code, we'll change the .html extension on each one of these pages to .php. So just go ahead and do that for each one. Now open the index.php file in your text editor. And I'm using Notepad++, so there it is. Because this is the first page we'll be working on. We also need to launch our localhost home page from the WAMP or MAMP menu. And once you have that open, just type in slash perfect cup, and the index page should come up. Make sure you leave this open in your browser window throughout the duration of this section of the course, because we'll be periodically checking any changes we make. So just leave this open. You can either minimize it. I have a few monitors here, so I'm just going to push it off to the side. And in the next lesson, we'll go ahead and get started on our first page. With the index file open, we can start making changes to the theme to suit our needs. We won't go through each block of code because by now you're most likely quite familiar with Bootstrap and HTML. The HTML code is also well commented, and each section of the page is clearly marked. So for example, line 14, you can see there's a comment for the Bootstrap core CSS. Same with the custom CSS fonts. The navigation code block starts at line 38. And so you can see that if you scroll down the page, it's very simple to understand. And you likely by now do have an understanding of what these code blocks mean. Let's go through a list of modifications we need to make to the home page. So I'm just going to shrink this window. And this is our index.php page. I also have the completed file here, so we can compare. The first thing we need to update is the main title. So this page title right over here, it needs to change to the perfect cup, home. We also need to change this text from business casual to the perfect cup. Next, if we scroll down a bit, we'll need to change this block here. Business casual needs to change to the perfect cup, and also the author needs to change to your name, or you can use a sample name if you like. Scrolling down the page, we'll need to remove this entire content text box. We no longer need it. We only need one. We'll need to make changes to the first content text box. This title needs to change, and also the text in here needs to change as well. On the footer, we'll need to change the text Your Website 2014 to the Perfect Cup 2016. And lastly, for the navigation menu is the same on each page. So all of these pages, home, about, blog, and content, have the exact same navigation menu. It would be a good idea to place the code for the navigation menu in a separate file. We can then include this file on each page. This makes it much easier to make changes to the navigation menu in the future. We would simply need to modify the included file, and the updates will be reflected on all the pages at once. So instead of having, say for example, we wanted to add an extra link, instead of changing the code on every single page, we simply make the change to the included file, and all the pages will automatically update. So let's go ahead and get started with making the changes. First, on line 12, change the page title to the Perfect Cup, home. And on line 35, change business casual to the Perfect Cup. On line 50, again, we'll need to change business casual to the Perfect Cup. And line 111, and this code block represents this text here. So change business casual to the Perfect Cup. And instead of by start bootstrap, just put in your name or any name. On line 139, this entire code block from line 139 to line 151, That's the second content area here, and we don't need that. So just go ahead and delete that entire code block. On line 146, change the copyright, change the text here to the perfect cup, and change the year to 2016. Now scroll up to line 126, and I'll just do a quick refresh. So we can see that our changes are now reflected. Instead of the text, build a website worth visiting, we're going to change it to how to make the perfect cup of coffee. And we can see that the perfect cup of coffee is bold. So just cut that out and paste it in between the strong tags. We'll also need to change the text starting at line 131. So right over here, delete all this text. Make sure you keep one paragraph open and close tag. And then just type out this text. So you can see that we've updated the text here to reflect the theme of this business. And the last thing we'll do is we'll scroll up to line 39. And line 39 to 72 is the navigation code block. We need to cut out this code. And we're going to paste it in a new file. So just go to File, New, paste this over here, and save this. Make sure you save it in the perfect cup folder that we were working in, and save it as nav.php. Once you've saved it, update all the links from the .html extension to .php. Now switch back to the index.php file, and you're going to paste in this line of code here. The PHP require once and nav.php. So once you've completed all those steps, just make sure you save the file, file save, and then go to and refresh your page. Make sure the navigation is there. So we've loaded the navigation from an external file, and we'll be doing the same for each one of our pages. So if we ever need to make changes to the navigation bar, we simply need to update that one file. And for now, that's it for the home page. And in the next lesson, we'll continue with the other pages. The next page we'll modify is the About page. Go ahead and open the about.php page in the text editor. We'll need to do a few things on this page. First, we need to change the page titles and headers. This image over here will also be replaced with a YouTube video. We'll go ahead and change the sample text over here to relevant text. We'll also update the image placeholders and the names below. And just like we did for the home page, we'll delete the navigation menu code block and replace it with our include statement. So the navigation menu will be included from the external file. So let's go ahead and get started. Scroll down to line 12 and change the page title. Scroll down to line 35 and change this text here. This represents this heading. I do the same on line 81 and 135. Now this is for this heading here. And line 135 is our copyright. So next we'll delete our navigation code block and replace it with our include statement. So I'll just scroll up to line 39 and delete that entire block. And then paste in the include statement. Let's go ahead and replace this text with the relevant text. And so on line 56, I'm just going to delete the text inside the paragraph tags and paste in the new text. And there we go. So the next thing we want to do here is replace the image with an embedded YouTube video. First, we need to locate the code block which pertains to this image. One way of doing that is using the development tools in your web browser. So if you right-click on this image, I'm using Google Chrome, and just click Inspect, you'll notice it highlights the code block pertaining to that image. And we can see that the source is slide2.jpg. So I can just look for that code in our file, and I found it here on line 53. If you're dealing with a page that has a lot more code, you can always just press Control F to find a specific line of code. To embed a YouTube video, go to youtube.com and you can pick any video you like. Again, this is just for sample purposes. I'll go ahead and choose this one. Just click on it and copy the URL for the video. So right click and hit copy. Now go to this web page. It's called embedresponsively.com. This web page will automatically generate the CSS to embed your desired YouTube video responsively. So all we need to do is paste the YouTube page URL and hit embed. So you can see a preview. And just copy the code here, the embed code, and paste it in place of our image. So I'll just close this, and I've saved the file, and I'll press refresh, and you can see that it's embedded the video, and it is responsive as well. Okay, so it's a much easier way than having to type out this entire style sheet. And remember, if you'd like, you can also put this style sheet in your head tag. But for now, we'll just leave it as an inline style tag. Lastly, we need to change the images over here under the heading Our Team. So we'll scroll down. And for me, that's going to be on line. The first image is going to be on line 74. So I just need to change this source. We already have these images located in our images folder, so just type in image/about1.jpg. That's the name of the first image. And this one will be about2.jpg. And when you press refresh, after saving, all the images will be there. Next, just go ahead and change the names underneath each image. And we don't need the job title, so I'm just going to get rid of that. And save and refresh. Okay, and that's all the changes we need to implement for the About page. So just remember to save your changes and then refresh your browser to preview the updated file. The next page we'll modify is the blog.php page. Go ahead and open the file in your text editor. On this page, we need to change the following items. We need to modify the page title, headings, and footer. We need to replace the navigation code with the PHP requires statement, as we have in the other pages. We also need to modify the blog posts and activate the read more buttons. So each blog post has an individual read more button. And the objective is to have them launch a modal window, which will present the viewer with some additional content. So I'll show you an example on the completed version. So as you can see, when I click the read more button, the modal appears. And each modal is customized, relevant to the blog post we clicked on. So you can see the title, Frozen Caramel Latte, matches the blog post title. And then we have some content area here. Note that we'll work on the member-only access functionality later on. So don't worry about the logout function and logging in. That's something that we're going to be doing after this tutorial. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We need to scroll down to line 12 and just change the page title. Do the same with line 35. Delete the navigation code and replace it with the PHP require statement. And on line 48, change the title, company blog, to the perfect cup. And also we'll need to change the footer. So I've just saved the file and I'm going to refresh. Okay, so the navigation is working. The title has been updated, and the footer is also updated. We'll need to change the text for each blog post. So here it says the post title, and it has some sample text attached to it. So we'll just go ahead and change it to some more relevant information. So I'll start with the first one, which is on line 54. And then the second one. And then the third. I've just saved the changes and we can see that the page has been updated. Next, we'll need to add a data toggle and data target attribute to each one of these read more buttons. And so the purpose of this is to launch the modal when the button is clicked. We haven't created the modals yet. We'll do that after we finish this step. So I'm going to scroll up to the first button, which is right over here on line 59. And I'm going to replace this with a button element. Okay, so here's our button element, type button, class, btn and btn info. It's a large size. I've set the data toggle to modal and data target to my modal. So remember that the data target will launch the modal associated with this ID. So it's important that each button has a unique data target name. And you'll see that in just a second. So I refreshed and there's the button. I'll do the second one. So this data target is set to my modal 2. And the third one will be set to my modal 3. Okay, so we have each one of the buttons done. I'll just refresh the page. And you can see that the button color is blue because of the class we've used. btn-info gives us the blue button. Now let's go ahead and create the modals. And we'll create the modals towards the bottom of the page, right before the footer. Okay, so that's what the modal syntax looks like. You can see that we've specified the ID, and this corresponds to the button that we created earlier. And then we have the class, modal, fade. And in the modal content, we have the content area, the header for the modal, a close button. And we've worked with modals before, so all this should look familiar. The modal title, modal body, and modal footer. So I'll save that and we'll refresh, and I'll go ahead and load the first modal. So there it is. That's what it looks like. The syntax for the second and third modal is going to be almost identical. The only thing that's going to change is the ID and the content, for example, the title. So I've already created the code for this for modal 2 and modal 3. And so there it is. Modal 2, there's the ID, my modal 2. And we can see that the modal title has changed to Irish coffee. That's the only difference. Nothing else has changed. And for modal 3, the only thing that's changed is the ID, my modal 3, and the title, frozen caramel latte. So I've saved the file, I'll refresh, and now each one should work. And so that completes that page, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Since our goal is to make the blog a members-only area, we'll need to create a registration form and a login page. Once a user registers, the data will be stored into a database. We'll need to create the database before creating the login and registration page. Let's go ahead and launch phpmyadmin so we can create the database. With phpmyadmin loaded, click the New button so we can create the database. And we'll give it the name Perfect Cup. Just be careful with the spelling to make sure it's correct. And for the collation, choose UTF Unicode CI and click Create. Now you should see the database appear on the left column. So just click on it when it does. Once you do that, you'll have the option of creating a table. And we're going to create a new table. You can name the table members and give it 5 columns. The first column will be named ID. The type will be integer, 15 characters max. Set the index to primary because it'll be our primary key. And check off auto increment. The next column will be fname and make that varchar 25. Next is lname, email, and password. Again, be careful that the spelling is correct and there's no typos. So password will be varchar as well, but set the length to 250 characters. And before I click save, I'll just confirm everything is okay. So once you've done that, just click the save button. And you'll see your members table pops up on the left column as well. Now that we have the database and table created, you can minimize phpmyadmin because we'll be working with it a bit later on. So I'll just move that out of the way for now. With our database created, we can now create the registration form. This is a preview of the registration form. The page is titled register.php, and the form has 4 text inputs: a first name, last name, email address, and password. Once this form is completed, some validation is conducted on the form, and we'll be using AJAX and PHP for that. When the register button is clicked, the data is inserted into our database. The user can then use the login form to log into his or her account and access the blog. Okay, and so that's what we'll be doing here. We'll be using the contact.php page as a template for the registration page since it already has a form. So this is the contact page, contact.php, and we'll need to make some changes. We don't need this entire section with the map and the contact information. So all we need is this section here, the contact form, and we'll have to make some changes to it. So we'll go ahead and get started. Open contact.php in your text editor and save this file as register.php. So just go to File, Save As, and type in register.php. Now we need to make some basic edits to this page. So on line 12, just change the title. Same thing on line 35. Remove the entire navigation code block and replace it with the PHP require statement. I'm just going to load this page by typing in register.php into the web browser so we can preview it as we move along. So you can see that the title is changed and the navigation is there. It's loaded from the external file. We'll need to now remove this entire section here, all of this. So it appears that the code for this entire section starts on line 43. And so I'm just going to remove that entire row from line 43 to line 70. Okay, so we're left with just the contact form content area. We don't need this text here, so I'm going to delete that. Okay, we're going to have to change this text, contact form, to registration form. And we'll just update the copyright text as well. Okay, so I've scrolled up to the form code block, and for me that starts on line 50. So there's a couple of things we need to do here. First of all, we need to change the labels to first name, last name, email address, and password. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so first name, last name, email address, and password. The password is not a text area. We need to change it to an input. So I'm going to delete the text area. And I'm going to copy one of these inputs and just paste it over here. Okay, so our text inputs are in. Our labels are correct. Now we need to add some attributes to our form elements. We need to add an ID and a name attribute to each element. This is so that we can use AJAX and PHP to process the form. You'll see this in action later on. So this is what you need to add in. So the first input, ID, fname, the name attribute, set it to fname as well, and give it a max length attribute of 25. Now for the last name element, change the type from email to text and insert this code, ID lname, name lname, max length 25. The email address, change the type to email and then insert this code. ID set to email, name set to email, and max length set to 25. For password, change the type to password. ID set it to password, name to password, and max length to 10. Now delete this hidden input. This just comes with the template. We don't need it, so just delete this entire input. For the button, the type is submit, which is what we need. Leave the class as it is. Just insert this ID. Set the ID to register. And again, you'll see why we're using these ID attributes when we get into working with the AJAX part of this form. Okay, so that completes the form. I'll just refresh the page. And it looks good. The next thing we need to do is use JavaScript and AJAX to display the status of our registration request after our PHP script has processed it. Note that we have not yet created the actual PHP script. We'll do that in the next lesson. The PHP script will transmit a success code or error codes back to our register.php page. We'll use AJAX to interpret the codes and display a success or error message without the user having to refresh the page. You can see an example of this on the completed version of the web page. If we leave the fields empty and click register, we get an error message, first name is required. There are multiple error states and one success state. The validation will include the following. We'll check to see if the email address is already in the system. We'll make sure the first name and last name, email, and password fields are completed. We'll also check to make sure the email is in the right format. And you can see that as I complete each field, the error state changes. Once all the fields are completed, I can click the register button. An account will be processed and we're taken back to the index page. So you'll notice that after the account is processed, we are redirected to another page. And so that's what we're trying to do here. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we'll need to do is move our jquery.js file. It's actually located down here. We're going to have to bring that up into our head tag. And the reason we do this is because we need to load the jQuery library before the rest of the page loads in order for this to work. Now we can create our JavaScript code and use AJAX to communicate with our PHP script. And remember that we'll be creating the PHP script in the next lesson. I'll insert the JavaScript code. It's a bit lengthy, but I will explain exactly how it all works. And before I go through the script, remember that we gave each one of our form elements an ID. We gave the register button the ID register, the fname, the ID fname, and so on and so forth. You can see here that the first ID we've referenced is the register ID. The register ID was attached to the register button. So when the register button is clicked, you can see the on-click event, we store the values of fname, lname, email, and password. The values of those inputs are stored into 4 new variables: fname, lname, email, and password. We then use AJAX to transmit the values to our PHP script using the post method. And remember, with AJAX, this is all done behind the scenes. The PHP file that we'll be creating in the next lesson is called adduser.php. And here we've specified the data that we're transmitting, the first name, last name, email, and password. Once the data is submitted, the PHP script will validate it to make sure it meets the requirements we'd set out earlier. So the validation. The PHP script will output error codes or a success code depending on the results of the validation. For example, if the PHP script outputs the code true, so if HTML equals true, we've set an alert to appear with the text account processed. And you can see that that text will be contained within a div. The alert is displayed in a div with the ID add_error2. So we haven't created that yet, so let's go ahead and create this div, which will contain all our status messages. So that's what the status message looks like. So we'll need to scroll down, and it's located directly underneath the registration form heading. So I'll need to scroll down. Here it is. And you're going to add the following line of code directly below this. Okay, so that's where our error messages will be contained. So I'll scroll back up. Once the account is processed, we have a redirection. So the user will be redirected to the index page. Now let's say the account was not processed successfully. This could be due to a number of reasons. First, if the PHP script outputs the text false, it means that an email address already exists in the system. For this reason, we would output the message email address already exists. If on the other hand the PHP script outputs the text fname, this will mean that the first name field was left empty, and so we'll output the message first name is required. And it's the same for lname short, which means the email address was left empty, and pshort, which means the password was left empty. Format will mean that the email address was in the wrong format. Okay, and these are user-defined codes, so this is what we've decided to use in the PHP script. We could have set the error code to anything we wanted, but you'll see that in the next lesson. Now lastly, we have an else statement that will display a general error message if the form was not processed but the reason was unknown. So for example, if none of these reasons are applicable, we'll just display a general message. And this could be due to a number of factors such as connection issue and things like that. The before send function here displays the word loading while the form is being processed. And this typically takes only a fraction of a second, so sometimes you don't even see the loading text. Okay, and that's how the JavaScript works. In the next lesson, we're now going to create the PHP script. Now that we have our form and JavaScript code completed, we need to create the PHP script that validates our form and inputs it into the database we've created earlier. We also need our PHP script to encrypt our plain text password prior to storing it into the database. So to get started, create a new file and save it as adduser.php. Make sure to save it in the perfect cup directory. The PHP script will start with a session start function. This will make sure that the user is logged into their account after registration. We'll store their user ID, first name, and last name using session variables. Later on, we'll create a logout button that will terminate the session. So you'll see this in action later on. Next, we need to create a connection to our database so that we can insert a new record if the form data passes validation. So the syntax should look familiar. We've just created a database connection and we've set the parameters to localhost, root user, no password, and the perfect cup database has been selected. Now we need to create the variables that will store the first name, last name, email, and password from our form. Since we use the post method in our AJAX call, we'll set the method to post in our PHP script as well. You can see that we've used the MySQL real_escape string function to escape any special characters that the user might have typed into the form inputs. This keeps your web page secure by preventing SQL injection. So the values that have been entered have been stored into these variables: fname, lname, email, and password. Next, we'll set up our validation. So here we have an if statement, and I haven't closed the if statement yet. And we'll explain that in just a second. The first three statements check to make sure that the fname, lname, and email data meets a minimum number of characters. Each check will output a different error message if the validation fails. For example, if fname is less than 2 characters, the error message will be fname. And if you recall, on our register.php page, we had our JavaScript interpret these error codes and display an error message to the user depending on the error code. So the first, second, and third check for the length using the string length function. This line here checks to make sure that the email format is correct. PHP has a built-in function for this. It's called filter var. And if the format is incorrect, the error code we've set is eFormat. Okay, so this is the email variable that stores the email address the user inputted. It will be checked for the correct format, and if the check fails, eFormat will be outputted. The last statement checks to make sure that the password input contains more than 4 characters. So essentially, we want the password to be a minimum of 4 characters just for security purposes. And if that check fails, we've set the output to p short. If the form data passes all validation, the next step in the process is to encrypt the password. And that's why we have an else statement. So if all this passes and there's no error codes, the next step is to encrypt our password. The password encryption is done using the password hash function that's built into PHP. This function will hash a plain text password into a 60-character string. Inside this function, we specify the password to hash and the encryption method. So we want to hash the data contained in the password variable. So that's the text that the users inputted into the password field. We also need to specify the encryption method. And the bcrypt method is most widely used and considered one of the best methods for hashing. So that's why we have the password bcrypt statement here. We can also specify a cost. The higher the cost value, the stronger the hash. Note that encrypting with very high cost values slows down the web page and is more demanding on the server. And we've set it to 12. So a higher cost value would be, say, 13 or 14. And any number below that would be considered a low cost. The hashed password is stored in a new variable called sPassword. We'll show you how to unhash the password when we create the login page. So for now, don't worry about unhashing. We're only concerned with hashing the password. After validation and password hashing, we execute a query statement. And this query statement is executed on the members table. So we select records from members where email is equal to the email variable. This is done to make sure that the registrant's email does not already exist in the system. If the user's email does exist, we're going to be outputting an error code false. And you'll see that in just a moment. So here's our if statement. That's what it looks like. This comment just trailed off, so I'm going to put it back in the right place. Okay, so this is what the if statement looks like. If the number of rows resulting from our query statement is less than 1, that means that the user's email does not exist in the system. And if that's the case, we're going to insert a row into our database and into the members table, which contains the first name, last name, email, and password that the user had inputted. So these are the column names. These are the values that are going to be inserted into these columns. If the row insertion was successful, we create 3 session variables that store the record ID, and the ID will be stored in a session variable called login. We also store the user's first name and last name. And this way the user will be logged into their account and they can access the member-only blog until they decide to log out. We've also set the PHP script to output the success code true once the record is inputted. So if the record's inputted, their account has been created successfully, and our JavaScript code on the register.php page is then going to redirect them to index.php, which is the home page. And that's going to happen after the account processed message appears. Okay, so here's our else statement. The else statement again is if the email does exist in the system. So if the user is already in the system, we echo the error code false. And on our register.php page, you can see here that if HTML is equal to false, the alert will be email address already exists in the system. Okay, and that's the complete script. So what we can do now is go ahead and test our script to make sure that it does work and that the record does input into the database. So I'm going to bring back phpmyadmin, and I'm just going to click on our members table. So right now we can see that there's no records inside our table. So I'm just going to go back to the web page. And here's the register.php page. I'll just refresh it. So first of all, if I click submit, you can see that we get the first name is required. So that tells us that the validation is working. So the JavaScript and AJAX code is successfully communicating with our PHP script, which is a good sign. And so I'll just enter a test record. And I'll click submit. So account processed, and it redirects to the index page. So that tells us that all this was most likely successful. I'm going to refresh the table, and there is the record we just created with the hashed password. Okay, and in the next lesson, we'll create our login page, so stay tuned for that. In this lesson, we'll create the login page used to access the member-only blog. The login page will be displayed if the web page detects no active session variables indicating that the user is signed in. So if we click on blog and the system detects that we're not signed into any account, you'll see we receive a message indicating that we must be logged in to view the blog. This here is an example of the login form. It requests the email address and password in order to authenticate the user. If the user provides an incorrect combination, an error message will be displayed, authentication failure. If the correct combination is supplied, we'll redirect the user to the blog. We'll also be modifying the blog so it displays a welcome message, as shown here. We'll also be modifying the blog so it displays a welcome message, as shown here, and also a logout link that terminates the session. Once logged out, the user will be directed back to the home page, and a message will be displayed indicating that the user has been successfully logged out of the system. The login page will also have a button with a link to the registration form in case the user is not yet a member. We'll be using the registration page as a template for the login page. With the registration page open, register.php, save the file as login.php. Make sure to save it in the same directory, perfect cup. Now I'm going to load the login page in my web browser so that we can preview it as we go along. We'll need to make some adjustments to the form. Scroll down to the section of the page containing the form. So here it is. For me, it's on line 123. First, we'll change the heading from registration form to login. So I'll just delete the word registration and change form to login. I've saved the page and I'm refreshing, so you can see login there. We need to remove the first name and last name input fields. We need to change the button label to login instead of submit. Also change the button element ID to login rather than register. Now create a button outside of the form and link it to the registration page. So there's the button. So if I click it, it should go to the registration page, and it does. So I'll just press the back button. Since the login page will only be visible if the user is not logged in, we'll create an alert indicating that the user will be required to log in to view the blog. So I'll just confirm the location. This alert, this is what we're creating, will be above the login header. And so there it is. Next, we'll need to modify our JavaScript code so that it transmits the email and password to a PHP script. This PHP script will be comparing it against our database entries, and if a match is found, the user will be redirected to the blog. So this is what the script is going to look like. I'm just going to paste it in here. The basic functionality of this script is almost identical to our registration page. We've only modified the form element names and error messages. So the first thing here you'll notice is that this entire script is activated with an onClick event, and that's when the login button is clicked. Next, we store the email address and password from the input fields that the user supplied. We then transmit these values to a PHP script named pcheck.php, and this is using the AJAX and the post method. We'll be creating the pcheck.php page in the next lesson, so don't worry about that for now. The pcheck page will check the username and password, or the email and password, and return either a true or false code. So if HTML equals true, we're going to output a success message, authenticated. If on the other hand, the error code is false, we're going to output an authentication failure message. Another thing I want to point out is that if the user is authenticated, they're automatically redirected to the blog. And we'd seen that in the example earlier. If any other errors occur, we output a very generic error message. So error processing request, please try again. And just like with the registration page, we display the word loading while all this is taking place. And again, the whole process only takes fractions of a second, so sometimes you might not even see this text displayed. Similar to the registration page, the error messages will be displayed in a div with the ID add_error2. So we'll need to create this div, and we'll create it underneath our login heading underneath here. So I'll just scroll down and look for, here's the login heading. Okay, and it appears we already have it. I just remembered from the registration page, so we don't even need to worry about that. And it's in the right location as well. So that's already done for us. The next thing we need to do is create the pcheck.php page that will check the email and password against the database for a match. So open a new file and save it as pcheck.php inside your Perfect Cup folder. So we'll start with our open and close PHP tags. Next, we'll set up the session start function, and this is because later in the script we'll create some session variables. We also need to retrieve the email and password supplied by the user using the post method. Next, we create the database connection to our Perfect Cup database. We then run a query on the members table to check if the email address already exists. Okay, so select records from members where email equals the email variable, and we'll store the query in a result variable. We then need to get the number of rows attached to the contents of the result variable. If the number of rows is greater than or equal to 1, this tells us that the email address does exist in the system. We then use the built-in password verify function to unhash the encrypted password in our database. We then compare the contents of the password variable to the unhashed password. If the two passwords match, we create 3 session variables. The first is login, which will store the user's ID and their first name and last name. The reason we do this is to keep the user logged in until they decide to log out or close their browser. So there's really 2 ways of triggering these session variables. First, if the user just registered, and we did that earlier, or if the user logs in. So in both scenarios, these 3 session variables are created. If the entire process is executed, we echo the text true. And so that's a success code, which is transmitted back to the login page. If the email address already exists, or if the password verification failed, in both these situations, we output the error code false. And again, that is also sent back to the login page. The next step is to make our blog.php page inaccessible if the user is not logged in. To do so, open your blog.php page and add the following block of code right at the beginning of the document. Here we've initialized the session using the session start function, and then we have an if statement. If the login session variable is set, then we've created 2 new variables, fname and lname. The fname variable holds the value of the fname session variable. Lname holds the value of the lname session variable. And remember that we'd set these session variables both on the pcheck.php page and on the adduser.php page. So basically, when a new account is created or when the user logs in. Okay, so I'm back onto the blog.php page. Now, if on the other hand the session is not set, so if the login session is not set, we need to create a redirect back to the login page. And so I'm going to scroll all the way down and insert the following block of code. So here we have an else statement which will redirect the user back to the login.php page. The last thing we need to do here is add a welcome message above our blog. So let's go to the blog. Okay, and you can see that the redirect is working. It's redirecting us back to the login page because it's determined that a session is not set. So we will have to log in. So I'll just quickly create a new user. Okay, now we can see the blog. And we're going to add the welcome message right above this heading. So here we have the text welcome, and then we echo the fname and lname variable, which is the user's first name and last name. We also have a link to a logout.php page, which will terminate the user's session. It'll log them out. We haven't created the logout.php page. We'll be doing that a little bit later on. So for now, I'll refresh the page. And there we go. The next step in our project is to create the logout.php page. Create a new document and save the file as logout.php in your perfect cup directory. Now insert the following block of code. Here we've cleared each session that we'd initially created. And this is done using the unset function. So the login session variable fname and lname are all cleared. Once they're cleared, we redirect the user back to the index.php page. We also pass along a variable called logout with the value set to true. And you'll see why we do this in just a moment. Make sure you save any changes you've made to this file and open your index.php page. We want to create an alert notifying the user that they've been successfully logged out of the system. And I'll show you an example on the completed website. This is the message we want to display, and you'll see that it's positioned directly underneath the address. Here is the variable logout with the value set to true. Okay, so in order to do this, you're going to insert the following block of code directly under the address. Here we first check to see if the variable logout is contained within our URL using the get method. If the variable is found, we check to see if the value of the logout variable is equal to true. And if the value is equal to true, we display our alert message stating that the user has been logged out of the system. Okay, so I'm just going to test this out now. I'm going to refresh the blog.php page. So now it's asking me to log in. And I'll just log in using one of the test accounts. So we've been authenticated and it says welcome Jobo. And here's the logout link. So I'm going to click logout. And you can see that we have been logged out, and here's the success message. I'll try to go back to the blog just to verify that we have been logged out. So it did work because now it's asking me to log back in. And so at this point, you can go ahead and test out the login function. In this lesson, we'll create the contact page shown in this example. This is the completed version here, and this is what we'll be creating. The page will consist of a map that shows a graphical illustration of the location using Google Maps, and the address is this one here. Underneath the map, we have some contact details, and we also have a contact form. The form asks the user to provide their name, email address, and message. The form also has validation using PHP and AJAX, similar to our registration and login forms. If the fields are left empty and the user tries to submit the form, you can see that we get an error alert displayed in red. The form data is transmitted to a specified email address using a PHP library known as phpmailer. We'll explain more about that once we create the PHP script. For now, let's get started on completing our contact.php page. So this is our current contact.php page. Let's go ahead and open it in our text editor. And we need to make some basic edits. So first, change the title. Also need to change line 35. Remove the navigation code block. And replace it with the PHP require statement. Over here, we're going to change contact business casual to contact the perfect cup. We'll also change the email address. Right now, it's just using an example email address, but we'll change it to something more relevant, even though we don't actually have this email address. Okay, so just to point out, this is strictly just text data. It has nothing to do with our contact form or where this email will be submitted. All that will be taken care of in our PHP script, which we'll program later on. And we'll change our footer here. Now with that complete, we can go ahead and update our map. So I'm just going to scroll up to the code block that represents the map, and it's located in here, this entire code block here. Right now we have a very general map of the United States. We want something that's specific to this address here. You can see in the example that it zooms into that specific location. So to embed a map, we can do so using Google Maps. So the first thing we'll need to do is go to maps.google.com. And I've copied this address. I'm going to paste it into this search field and click the search button. Now I'm going to click this icon here, the menu, and click share or embed map. Now we don't want to share a link, we actually want to embed the map. So click on the embed map tab and copy this entire line of code in this text field here. Don't worry about the size, we can always modify the size in our script. So I've copied this code and I'm going to exit this window now. And I'm going to replace the existing map with the new code. And we will need to change the size. So I'm going to change it to 100% width by 400 pixels height and press refresh. So as you can see, we're now zoomed into our location. And that makes it obviously a lot easier for visitors to find us. Okay, just save the page now and refresh just to make sure that all your changes have been reflected on the page. And in the next lesson, we'll get started on the contact form. Now we'll need to go ahead and make some changes to our contact form. So I'll scroll down and we're going to remove this block of text here. We also want to remove the phone number, input, and label. So I'll just delete this block of code here. We need to add an ID and name attribute to each field. So I'll start with the name field, and then the email address. Okay, so we'll let the user type in a little bit more text into the message area, 100 character max, and you can increase or decrease that depending on your needs. And I just need to add the ID contact to the submit button. And there's a hidden input here. We don't need this, so just delete it. Now add the div that will contain our error messages. So our error messages will be displayed right above the name label, as you can see here. And the ID for that div is add_error2, consistent with what we've been using for the other pages as well. Next, we'll need to move the jQuery.js include into our head tag because we want to load the library immediately. Now we need to create our JavaScript code to transmit the data to our PHP script and display any success or error messages. And remember that this is done using JavaScript with AJAX integration. So I'm just going to paste the script in. And remember that this is available to you in your downloads folder, so you don't have to type out the entire thing. I'll just go through the script. We first start with an on-click event on the submit button with the ID contact. Once the button's clicked, we store the values of the three inputs, fname, email, and message. The data is transmitted to our PHP page called sendmessage.php. We'll create this file in the next lesson. So we haven't made that yet. And a lot of this should look familiar. We've worked with this script a couple of times now. And below are our success and error codes. So if our PHP script outputs the word true, we're going to display a message sent alert. And then everything else is an error code. So for example, fname long would mean that the first name has exceeded 50 characters, which is not allowed. Fname short would mean that the first name has not exceeded 2 characters. And then we have email long, email short, which is the same thing, but for the email address. E format again. So the E format is going to check if the email address is in the correct format. If not, it's going to just output the error code E format. And then we have message long and message short, which checks to make sure that the message doesn't exceed 50 characters, but it must exceed 2 characters. And then we have just a generic, if any other error occurs, we're going to put error processing request message. Please try again. And so that's the entire script. It's pretty straightforward. Again, we've done that a few times now. And so in the next lesson, we'll go ahead and create our PHP script that'll take care of validation and submitting this ultimately to an email address. Now that we have our contact form completed, we need to create the PHP page that validates the form data and transmits it to a specified email address. Before we begin, you'll need to download a PHP library known as phpmailer. phpmailer is one of the most popular code libraries for sending emails from PHP. It's an open source project with integrated SMTP support. This means you can process emails without having a local mail server installed. More information about phpmailer can be found at the link below. phpmailer is very easy to use. First, we'll need to go to the website. On the website, you'll see a download zip button. Right-click on it and save the link on your desktop. Now I already have it saved here, so I'm going to cancel, but you can go ahead and click save. When your file is downloaded, you'll need to use an extraction utility such as WinZip to extract the folder onto your desktop. So I'll just right-click on it and use WinZip to extract the folder. And that'll take a couple of seconds. So here's the extracted folder. And once you double-click on it and open the folder, there's going to be another folder contained within it. Rename this folder to phpmailer. Now we need to copy this folder and paste it in our perfect cup directory. And so that's all there is to it. The phpmailer library is now ready to use. You can see all the files contained inside. And these are all the files that are used to transmit emails. So you can go ahead and close down this folder now. And in the next lesson, we will start working on the actual PHP script. In this lesson, we'll create the sendMessage.php file, which is responsible for validating our contact form data and transmitting the email using the SMTP protocol. So start a new document and save the file as sendmsg.php and make sure you save it in your perfect cup directory. Although we won't be storing this data into our database, we're going to start our PHP script with a database connection. This will come in handy if you ever need to store the contact form submissions into a database. This is commonly done for future reference, and that way you can track your customers. Next, we'll request the form data using the post method. And we've stored the data into 3 variables, fname, email, and message. So this is the data coming from our contact form. We've used the MYSQL real escape string just to prevent any SQL injection. And so again, that adds an additional layer of security. We also need to create a variable that defines the recipient's email address. So we're going to store that in a variable called email2. This is where the form data will submit to. So you'll receive this email here. So you're going to plug in your email address. Next, we'll create a variable that stores the subject line of the contact form. So we'll just put test message. And now we'll validate the form data. So this is just done in a basic if statement, and we've done this quite a few times. If fname is greater than 50 characters, we're going to echo the error code fname long. If it's less than 2 characters, fname short. If the email is more than 50 characters, email long. If it's less than 2 characters, email short. If the email is in the incorrect format, we have the eFormat error code and message long and message short. If validation passes, we have our else statement. If the validation passes, we can proceed to sending the message using PHP mailer. We start with a require statement that includes an essential file in the PHP mailer directory, and that's called phpmailer autoload.php. Next, we create a new PHP mailer object and store that in a variable called mail. And this is the actual email submission code block. And I'll just go through it. So this line over here sets the PHP mailer to use the SMTP protocol. Next, we have the host. The SMTP host is your outgoing mail provider. So an example would be Gmail. If you're using Gmail as your outgoing email provider, the SMTP host is smtp.gmail.com. Now, if you're not using Gmail, this information would be available through your email service provider's website, or you can call them, depending on who you're using. Next, we specify that our host requires authentication, which is almost always the case. So that's why it's set to true. We then set the username, which is your email address, and the password you use for this email account. I've left it blank, but you will need to plug that in. Next, we enable TLS encryption for security purposes. Gmail uses port 587 to send emails via SMTP. So again, you'll need to check with your service provider to find out which port they use. Next, we set up our reply to email. And so that's stored in our email variable. The from email is stored in the email to variable. This is who the email is from, and for that we've used fname. So the person that filled out the contact form is the one sending the message. You can add additional recipients as well. So here we've just plugged in a demo email. You don't have to have additional recipients. This is optional. This line sets the email to HTML format, and that's better for styling purposes over text-based emails. Then we have the email subject, which is stored in the subject variable, the email content, the body content, which is stored in the message variable. So remember, we defined all these variables up here. All this data comes from our contact form on the contact.php page. Lastly, we have an if statement. If the email message was not sent for any reason, we're going to echo message could not be sent. Now, the only other alternative to this is that the email was sent, in which case we're going to echo the word true. This code, the success code, will then be sent to our contact.php page and interpreted using JavaScript and AJAX to alert the user of the success state. And so that's the entire script there. So I'm just going to refresh the contact.php page. Now I've plugged in our password for this email account. I'll just fill out the contact form details. And click the submit button. So here we get the success message sent, and it should appear in the inbox, and there it is. It's fairly quick. And so that's what the email looks like in the inbox. You can see the subject test message, and it's from Bob to admin@uxl.com, and then the message body. Now if we click reply, you can see that the reply address is bob@gmail.com. So everything is working the way it should be.